Okay, let's go ahead and get started. The meeting of the Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission will now come to order. Members are reminded to keep yourselves on mute unless you are asking to raise a question or whatever. For those of you who are maybe hearing a chainsaw in the background to my presentation, it's because my neighbor chose today to take down a very large tree next door. But we'll do what we can to keep that as quiet as we can. Hope it's a lovely day throughout the Commonwealth. It certainly is here in Northern Virginia. So thanks for being with us. We have a busy calendar, a busy schedule for the day. As is the case, we'll ask you if you would to allow the staff to go forward with their presentations. And they've always been good at pausing periodically to give us opportunity to ask questions. You ask questions by unmuting yourself and directing your request to the chair, and we'll acknowledge you and we can go forward then with our discussion. Hal, if you'll kick us off with the logistics and roll call, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Vice Chair and members of the Commission. Welcome to the September meeting of JLARC. I'm Hal Greer, the Staff Director. At this point, I will turn over to Nathan Skreslet, who'll give you a brief rundown on meeting logistics. Delegate Plum has already covered them to some extent, so Nathan, you can make it fairly brief, and then Nathan will call the roll. Nathan?
All right, can do. Good morning, members of the Commission. My name is Nathan Skreslet. I'm on the staff here at JLARC, and I'll be facilitating the technical side of today's meeting. So we have several different types of participants for today. We have all of our Commission members, JLARC staff, and some agency staff who are presenting today are categorized as panelists. All panelists have the ability to share voice and video, to ask questions and make comments. The second group of participants is called attendees. They can view the meeting but cannot share audio or video. We do that in order to keep the number of simultaneous audio and video streams down for those with less stable connections. However, those in the attendee group can be promoted to panelists to answer questions as needed. For the third group, for members of the media and the public, we have a live stream being sent to YouTube, which the public can view, but once again, they cannot make comments or participate directly. Afterwards, recordings of this meeting will be available both on the YouTube channel and on the JLARC website. As you join the meeting, you were, of course, placed on mute. We do ask that you mute your mics when not in use. I have the ability to mute them remotely. Should you forget, I cannot activate them remotely, so you'll have to do that yourselves. And as the chair already mentioned, if you'd like to ask questions, just ask the chair to be recognized. I do know that we have at least one person calling in today without video, so if you do want to ask a question, just please let us know who you are, otherwise, because your name is not displayed. And if you have any technical issues during the meeting, we have staff standing by to help you out. So I can move on to the roll call now. If you could be close to your mics just to let us know if you're here. I'll proceed alphabetically. Do we have Delegate Austin?
Present.
Delegate Carr?
Present.
Speaker Fillicorn?
Present.
Delegate Cox?
Here.
Delegate Herring?
Here.
Senator Howell?
Here.
Senator Locke?
Here.
Senator Norman? Is not present. Ms. Maries?
Here.
Senator McPike?
Here.
Delegate O'Rourke?
Present.
Delegate Plum?
Here.
Delegate Sickles?
Present.
Senator Spruill? I know he was having some trouble getting in, so I resent him his link. Hopefully he'll be able to join us. And Delegate Torian? All right.
Present, I'm here.
Oh, thank you. All right, now let us turn it back over to Hal to proceed with the agenda.
Thank you, Nathan. And I believe Senator Norman is here as well.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we have two primary agenda items this morning. The first item is a presentation of the findings from our review of the Department of Small Business and Supplier Diversity. And we have Tracy Wiley, the director of the agency, here as well, and she'll speak following the staff presentation. The second major item is the presentation of the findings from our review of regional and infrastructure incentives. Eric Johnston, the director of the Department of Housing and Community Development, is here and will speak following that presentation. After these two presentations, there'll be two short items. We'll briefly share the next round of economic development incentives that we've begun work on. And finally, under other business, Delegate Sickles will report on the work of the Study Topic Selection Subcommittee, which met this past Friday. Mr. Chairman, turning to the review of the Department of Small Business, I first want to thank Tracy Wiley and her staff who've been extremely accommodating to us during this review and provide us with full access to her staff and the information we needed to conduct this review. While we are pleased to be able to report that the agency as a whole is moving in a positive direction, we are concerned about the performance of the Small Business Financing Authority, which is housed within SBSD. You'll hear this morning that the authority has fallen short of its responsibilities in serving small businesses in Virginia and lacks some of the fundamental practices and processes necessary to effectively administer a finance authority. This finding is particularly concerning given the growing financial pressures that Virginia's small businesses are facing and the greater need for loan programs like those afforded by the authority. It's also concerning because the authority has recently begun responsibility for two new programs, the Rebuild Virginia Grant and the COVID loan program. We have a number of recommendations to address the authority's shortcomings and get it on a path to fully meeting its mission. With that, I'll turn it over to Justin Brown, who oversaw this study, to share a few additional remarks before introducing Lauren Excel, who is the project leader for this study. Justin?
Thank you, Hal. Before I turn it over to Lauren, I just want to also thank SBSD staff for their cooperation. This study unfolded during a very disruptive time for all of us. During the whole shift to telecommuting, SBSD worked hard to really accommodate us while also still administering their program. So we really do appreciate that effort on their part. I also wanted to let you know that you'll notice that Lauren has kind of two types of information. Some of it is very directly related to SBSDS programs, particularly the certification of small businesses and the lending to small businesses. But we also have two sections at the end about things that SBSD has a role in, but does not directly control. And that's the SWAM spending goal and the SWAM plans, as well as the state's small business definition. I also want to say that in the interest of time, Lauren will not be addressing everything included in our written report. There's some findings and recommendations in the report that she will not cover, but if you notice something in there and you're interested in it, please feel free to ask her and she will try to answer your question. I'd conclude by saying we also have quite a bit of information in the appendices to the written report, particularly as it relates to potentially changing the state's small business definition. So that is there as a reference for people that are interested. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll now turn it over to Lauren to start her presentation.
Thank you, Lauren. Welcome. Thank you for the good work you've done.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. My name is Lauren Excel, and I was the project leader for our review of the Department of Small Business and Supplier Diversity. Christine Wolf and Sarah Birdie Sachs assisted me with this review. I want to thank them for all of their hard work and also SBSD for their help and cooperation throughout the project. Slide 2 lists the key topics from our study mandate. As you can see, we were asked to conduct a pretty broad review of SBSD, including the Virginia Small Business Financing Authority, or VSBFA. We were also asked to review the state small business definition, as Justin mentioned. We completed various research activities for this review, including interviews with SBSD staff, businesses, and other states, analyses of data on certification, financing programs, and business size, and surveys of SBSD staff, state agencies, and businesses. During our study, it became clear that small businesses were having a pretty hard time due to COVID-19 when we interviewed and surveyed them. SBSD staff also confirmed that there's been an increased demand for agency services due to the pandemic. This underscores the importance of SBSD and its ability to administer its programs both efficiently and effectively. I'll pick back up on this a little bit later in the presentation when I discuss VSBFA's financing programs. To briefly summarize the results of our review, we found that SPSD certifications are timely and determinations are largely accurate, but not all businesses have the opportunity to appeal denials. The SBFA is not fully achieving its mission of helping small businesses access financing, and it lacks lending policies that set appropriate risk standards. State agency procurement spending with SWAM certified businesses is substantial, but the majority of executive branch state agencies did not achieve the governor's 42% SWAM procurement goal. And finally, much of the state's procurement activity is with businesses that are much smaller than the current small business size. But some relatively large outlier businesses are also eligible under the definition. Mr. Chairman, there are 5 parts to my presentation this morning. I'll start by covering some background information and agency management. The legislator created SBSD in 2014 by merging the Department of Business Assistance and Department of Minority Business Enterprise. SBSD is a relatively small agency with 40 staff and approximately $7 million annually in funding. SBSD has 4 primary functions, including business certification and small business financing. They also administer the state's Business One-Stop website and provide business assistance services. We have recommendations to improve both of these functions in our written report, but I won't cover them this morning for the sake of time. SPSD also has responsibilities related to the state's SWAM goal and small business definition, though it does not set these policies. As this graphic shows, there are multiple actors and policies in this area. SPSD is shown in the dark blue box towards the beginning of the graphic on the left-hand side. 2 key things that I'll highlight here are that SPSD has a role tracking and helping agencies to achieve the state's 42% SWAM goal, which is set by the governor. Additionally, SPSD certifies businesses using the state's small business definition, which makes businesses eligible for procurement set-asides. I'll revisit these topics again towards the end of my presentation, but wanted to provide some context for how they all fit together. SPSD has addressed many of the shortcomings identified in previous studies, including those related to certification. To give a few examples, businesses can now apply for certification through an online portal, which has made the process more efficient and helped SPSD eliminate its previous backlog of certification applications. When we surveyed SPSD staff to ask about agency management and culture, staff overwhelmingly provided positive feedback. Over 85% were satisfied with their job, SPSD as an employer, and many other aspects of the agency. This level of satisfaction is similar to, if not higher than, other state agencies we've recently reviewed in the past. I'll pause here if there are any questions about the background information and agency management. Okay, now I'll spend a few minutes providing more detail on SPSD's business certification function. SPSD certifies various types of businesses, but most are small, micro, women-owned, or minority-owned. These businesses are often called SWAM businesses, but businesses can have 1 or more of these types of certifications. As shown on slide 11, SPSD's certification process has 3 main steps. Businesses submit a certification application to SPSD that includes various required documents. An SPSD certification officer then reviews the application to determine whether the business is eligible. And then SPSD renders a determination and notifies the business. In looking at the certification process, we found that it is timely and SPSD certification determinations are largely accurate, but staff often have to follow up with businesses to collect all the necessary application information. Not all businesses are able to appeal denials, and some are confused about how the appeal process works. We identified several additional opportunities for SPSD to further streamline and clarify the certification process, which are detailed in Chapter 2 of our written report. In the interest of time, though, I'll just focus on these 2 findings. The figure on slide 13 shows that processing times for small, micro, women-owned, and minority-owned businesses all decreased since 2017. And you can see that by looking at the figure from right to left. All these certifications are also currently being processed within SBSD's 60-day goal, which is shown in the middle of the figure. This was not the case in 2017. SBSD certification determinations are also mostly accurate. We reviewed all small and micro businesses to see if they meet the state size requirements, and 99% did. Only 27 micro businesses did not. SBSD staff had confused the size requirements in these cases and are currently working to decertify these businesses. SBSD's high accuracy rate is likely the result of the processes they have in place to ensure accuracy, such as having management staff review all denied SWAM applications and a sample of approved ones. Although applications are processed faster and determinations are largely accurate, certification staff often have to request more information during the application process, which frustrates businesses. There were almost 17,000 follow-up requests for 10,000 applications in 2019. Follow-up requests are typically needed when businesses are unclear about the information they need to submit for their application. Multiple businesses said they were unclear on application requirements or highlighted the extent of follow-up requests during our business survey. Some certification entities proactively address these types of confusions by encouraging businesses to participate in pre-certification meetings or webinars to clarify the application process. It's also worth mentioning that appeals are currently only available to businesses that have been denied recertification. Businesses that apply for a new SWAM certification and are denied cannot appeal. We asked SBSD why the process works this way, and we're told it was intended to help staff manage the appeals workload. This limitation doesn't make sense from a policy perspective, though, and it seems to confuse businesses. Some businesses are not clear on the reasons they can appeal or the difference between SBSD's appeal and waiver processes. So we have 3 recommendations in our report. One for SBSD to post pre-certification materials online that describe the applications process in more detail to businesses. One for SBSD to broaden the appeals process. And one to further clarify how appeals work for businesses in the denial letter they receive and on SBSD's website. SBSD has shared with us that they've already taken action on the first recommendation. And I'll pause again here for any questions about certification.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman,
Doug Austin.
a question for Lauren, please.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Lauren, if a business is denied a certification and they cannot appeal, how often can they reapply? How quickly can they reapply and start the process over?
That's a good question, Delegate Austin. It's my understanding that businesses have to wait a 6-month waiting period to reapply. So that would be the period they would have to wait if they cannot appeal.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Doug Austin.
Lauren, would they then have to begin the process completely over? Or can they rectify where they were negligent and started that at that point?
That's also a good question. It's my understanding with the certification portal, the way businesses are applying now online, that there is a capability to retain some information, but I'm not sure if a business is denied outright if any of that information would be retained. There is also a waiver process though. So if a business is denied and they don't appeal, but say they have new information to provide, they might be able to go through the waiver process itself, and that might save them from having to resubmit all the information from the beginning.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Okay. Now I'll move on to our findings about small business financing programs, which are administered by VSBFA. VSBFA's mission, as laid out in the code, is to provide financial assistance to small businesses. Many entities, like private banks, offer financing, but public institutions like VSBFA are important because they provide gap financing to small businesses that have difficulty securing funds from banks. This is often because small businesses are too risky, or they require loans that are not profitable for banks to administer. As I mentioned earlier, VSBFA is a division within SBSD, but it operates somewhat differently from the other divisions and has its own executive director and oversight board. VSBFA administers 3 types of financing programs: direct loans, which are underwritten and administered by VSBFA staff in-house; support loans, where banks loan the money to small businesses, but VSBFA commits financial assistance if the loans are not repaid; and the small business investment grant. Importantly, VSBFA recently assumed responsibility for the nearly $71 million Rebuild Virginia grant program, which is designed to help businesses recover from COVID-19. VSBFA also has received about $10 million in funding for a COVID loan program that is currently working to design and develop. These new programs are much larger than all other VSBFA programs combined and have created a lot of additional responsibilities for staff. This makes it especially important that VSBFA is run efficiently and effectively so it can administer new and existing programs to support small businesses. Slide 21 summarizes all of the operational shortcomings that we've identified for VSBFA. I'll address most of them in the next few slides, but there are a few I won't cover for the sake of time. They are detailed in Chapter 3 of our written report. First and foremost, we found that VSBFA has not fully achieved its mission of helping small businesses access funding over the past few years. Specifically, VSBFA has not awarded most of its available loan funding. As shown in the bars on slide 23, VSBFA only awarded 8% of loan funding across all of its loan programs in 2018, only 10% in 2019, and only 24% in 2020. Between 92% and 76% of loan funds were not awarded in these years, which means VSBFA could have helped many more small businesses access funding. Loan applications have also generally declined in recent years. The black line on the graph shows the number of businesses applying for loans declined from 145 applications in 2017 to only 67 applications in 2020. There are multiple factors that have contributed to VSBFA's low lending levels, including inconsistent leadership at the executive director level, staffing shortages and loan officer positions, and a lack of lending goals that account for credit conditions. Declining applications were largely caused by insufficient marketing of VSBFA programs to businesses and banks. We have several recommendations in our report that would help address these deficiencies, including that VSBFA set utilization goals for loan programs that account for credit conditions and available funds, track and annually report on loan and grant funds utilized, and develop an agency-wide marketing plan that includes VSBFA programs. Our next key finding about VSBFA is that it lacks lending policies that set appropriate risk standards for loans, which has resulted in VSBFA making overly conservative loan decisions and has caused confusion among VSBFA staff and banks. VSBFA does not currently have policies that articulate the appropriate risk level for loans or a tool to assess loan applications consistently. These things are important. Given VSBFA's mission to help small businesses, we would expect to see policies that allow loan awards to businesses that have a bit more risk than private banks accept, and that help staff make loan decisions consistently. We identified several state agencies and banks that have risk assessment policies and tools. For example, VEDP has a tool to assess the risk of businesses applying for economic development grants, and the Virginia Resources Authority has a tool to assess the risk of localities with outstanding infrastructure loans. VSBFA's lack of risk-related policies and tool has caused overly risk-averse loan decisions, and it has been a source of confusion for VSBFA staff and banks. In fiscal year 19, VSBFA loan programs lost 1% of funds. This rate is close to the average amount of losses reported by private banks, but it is substantially below a federal EDA benchmark of 10%. This suggests that VSBFA has room to make loans to businesses with a higher default risk. The lack of standard risk policies has caused confusion. One bank commented that after several unsuccessful attempts to partner, they just gave up having VSBFA as an option. VSBFA loan officers are also confused because it's difficult to anticipate whether their decisions regarding loan applications will be approved or denied by management. This unpredictability has contributed to low staff morale in VSBFA. We have 2 recommendations that would have VSBFA develop policies that set risk standards and adopt a risk assessment tool to calculate the risk of applicants.
We taking questions, Mr. Chairman?
Senator Spruill?
Are we taking questions now? If she just about finished, I'll wait till she finishes if you don't mind.
Okay, you wait to finish, okay?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I'm almost to the end of this section. We also found that VSBFA is not regularly monitoring outstanding loans, which can help loan programs reduce the risk of financial loss, according to subject matter experts. VSBFA regularly monitors businesses' monthly repayments, but does not currently monitor the financial health of businesses with outstanding loans for any of its loan programs. This lack of monitoring was a point of concern for VSBFA staff, with one telling us, "We don't know where our landmines in our portfolio are right now." Banks typically review outstanding loans on a regular basis, focusing on loans above a certain size and with a higher risk. This is beneficial because it allows them to proactively connect businesses to technical assistance or prepare for default as needed. Proactive monitoring is an especially timely topic because many businesses are experiencing financial stress related to COVID-19. Therefore, we recommend that VSBFA implement a risk-based monitoring system to proactively identify outstanding loans with a decreasing likelihood of repayment. For support loans, we have a recommendation that VSBFA should require banks to proactively inform them of loans that become high risk. And to hold VSBFA accountable for making all of the improvements that I've covered this morning, we have a recommendation for VSBFA to develop an improvement plan that addresses all key shortcomings and sets reasonable timeframes to implement the improvements. The plan should be submitted to the VSBFA board, the General Assembly, and the Secretary of Commerce and Trade, and VSBFA should report quarterly to the board on its progress. And I'll go ahead and pause here for questions about VSBFA.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But the problems that they are having and the recommendation that you have, what mechanism can we use to replace the whole top management? They have serious problems. I can see all the recommendations that you have, and which would help them. But the kind of problem they have, and the banks say they have a problem, and the goal, what you have found that they have, is a problem. We need to make some changes at the leadership level to get this thing done, because all these problems they're having, they can't fix those problems. We need a change in the leadership. Is that a possibility?
Well, maybe we'll let Lauren off the hook on being able to answer that.
All right.
In sticking with her recommendations for the time being, but we have an opportunity to discuss that a little bit more further. Other
Yes,
questions right now?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Norman.
Following up on the direction that Senator Spruill just brought up, I've got a series of 4 or 5 questions in that same vein at the appropriate time, sir.
You may proceed.
Well, I thought you wanted to defer the topic that Senator Spruill brought up. Mine is playing off of that.
Okay. Okay, I'll come back to you.
Thank you, sir.
Lauren, I think you were on your next to the last section.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Cox.
Yeah, I don't specifically want to address what Senator Spruill did, but Lauren, can you give us, I mean, obviously the lending piece is not good at all. And you made recommendations. Could you give us a little bit more detail about comments from management, et cetera, about why I mean, the loan funding piece was so low. It just seems like almost every aspect of it was pretty poor. Could we get a little bit more detail on, you had your recommendations, and obviously that covers a little bit of it. Could you maybe scope that out a little bit more for us? Because, you know, obviously, especially 2020, when this is so serious for small business, this is a pretty bad report.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to describe that a little bit more. And I'm just going to go back to slide 24 here. These really were some of the key things that I'll just emphasize in terms of why the lending was so low in recent years. And it really does come down to that inconsistent leadership in the executive director position. And speaking with staff through interviews and a survey, it sounds like not having consistent leadership at that top level really did hinder the agency from developing plans to move forward and how to address some challenges they were having. And then looking at that second bullet right there, going to the staffing of the loan officers themselves, this is a relatively small part of SBSD. There are only 8 staff in VSBFA. And 3 of those staff are responsible for the lending, and they're in loan officer positions. And so when we looked at the staffing levels during the years where the lending has been very low, we saw that 2 of those positions had long-standing vacancies. One was vacant for, I believe, 18 months, and I think the other was nearly 2 years. So going down to 1 loan officer really hindered the agency's ability to get the funds out the door. Particularly in recent years. And when we look at where the agency is now, or where the authority is now, they were able to fill all of those loan officer positions for a brief period of time, for about 6 months. And one of those positions just recently went vacant again.
Mr. Chairman, final question.
Okay.
And Lauren, could you, I mean, obviously 5 permanent acting executive directors in 3 years is whoa. A little bit detail on, I mean, because you said the agency, as far as morale was improved. So, and I know these things are a lot of times individual, but that is an incredible turnover rate. Any insight into that?
Sure. So it's my understanding that there was an executive director at the beginning of all this who was in the position for a pretty long period of time. Then when that position turned over, I think there was a pretty substantial gap there as they were trying to fill that position. And so the chief credit officer had to step in as acting executive director during that time period. Then the next 2 executive directors were in the position for a relatively brief amount of time. I think in at least one of those cases, I believe it just wasn't a great fit compared to doing a similar position in the private sector. But certainly Tracy Wiley, I would defer to her to speak in a little bit more detail on why those 2 shorter term executive directors left. And then currently the position was filled in October of last year. So VSBFA has had an executive director now in that position for almost a year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Lauren, would you like for me to speak to that now, or would you prefer I wait?
Wait just a minute. We're going to give you a chance to make your formal presentation first, and then be able to respond. So let's just finish up with Lauren first, if we might. Lauren?
Sure. Okay. Back on to slide 34. Now I'd like to switch gears a little bit. The 2 remaining sections of my presentation cover policy areas that SBSD is involved in, but does not set the policies. I'll start with some findings about the state SWAM goal and plans, and then I'll close out with the state small business definition. As many of you are aware, the state has a 42% SWAM procurement goal that is set by the governor through executive order. Agencies are required to develop SWAM procurement plans describing their SWAM performance, which are collected annually by SBSD. SBSD maintains an online database of agency SWAM performance called the SWAM Expenditure Dashboard. Our research in this area found that executive branch spending with SWAM certified businesses is substantial and provides certain benefits to certified businesses. The primary benefit being that the SWAM program helps certified businesses win state contracts. According to the SWAM expenditure dashboard, executive branch agencies procured over $2 billion through SWAM businesses in fiscal year 19. This level of SWAM purchases has increased over time, about 15% since 2016. We conducted a longitudinal analysis of the state contracts awarded to SWAM businesses before and after they were certified, which confirmed the link between the SWAM program and businesses winning state contracts. We found that median sales were about 20% higher for businesses after they were SWAM certified. Businesses that responded to our survey further confirmed that SWAM certification helps them win state contracts, but some also said it affords them non-monetary benefits, such as an improved image. Although the SWAM program has benefits, we found that agencies have varying abilities to meet the 42% goal, with the majority saying it's difficult to achieve. The figure on slide 39 shows the wide variation between each agency's SWAM procurement spending. In 2019, agency SWAM expenditures ranged from 4% to 87%. And 60% of agencies fell short of the 42% goal, including several of the state's largest purchasers like VDOT, Virginia Tech, and UVA. 56% of agencies that responded to our survey expressed difficulty in achieving the goal, including several that said it was extremely or very difficult. A couple key factors explain agencies' difficulties achieving the SWAM goal, including the availability of SWAM certified businesses and the number and size of agency procurements. Some agencies purchase a large portion of goods or services in industries that have few certified SWAM businesses. For example, several higher education institutions have large contracts for specialized research materials, which can make it impossible for them to meet the 42% goal. The number and size of agency procurements also varies each year, which can affect opportunities to procure from SWAM businesses. For example, an agency with few purchases or only large purchases that cannot be fulfilled by SWAM businesses may not be able to meet the SWAM goal. We have a policy option in our report for the governor to direct each state agency to set an individualized, ambitious SWAM goal that accounts for the availability of SWAM certified businesses and the variability of the state agency's procurement needs. A policy option is a bit different than one of our recommendations. We use policy options when the proposed action is a policy judgment best made by elected officials, especially when a finding could be addressed in multiple ways. This is one of those cases, but we think this approach could help address the challenges agencies experience in meeting the SWAM goals. Our next finding is related to SWAM plans. We found that SPSD is fulfilling its required role in the SWAM plan process as defined in the code, but staff are not giving agencies meaningful feedback on their plans. Agencies need to identify and implement workable strategies to purchase from SWAM businesses. The current SWAM plan process does not do that. Over the past year, SPSD has been holding meetings each month with different groups of agencies to discuss SWAM spending. As required by the code, SPSD also collects completed SWAM plans from agencies each year. However, SPSD does not provide agencies with feedback on their plans. In fact, none of the agencies we surveyed reported receiving feedback from SPSD on their plan. The majority of agencies disagreed or had no opinion that the SWAM plans are a helpful tool. This may be because the SWAM plan template currently requires most descriptive information and focuses on prior activities rather than future strategies to increase SWAM spending. We have two recommendations to improve the SWAM plan process in our report. The first is for the governor to amend Executive Order 35 to have SPSD revise the SWAM planning process to focus more on strategies and substantive interactions between SPSD staff and state agencies. The second recommendation is for SPSD to develop a list of effective strategies and guidance on how to implement them to share with agencies. And I'll go ahead and pause here before going into our last section.
Lauren, in interest of time, why don't you go ahead and do the small business definition, and then we'll open up for discussion.
No problem. Okay, and for this last section about the state small business definition, I just wanted to reemphasize, as I mentioned earlier, SBSD does not set the state small business definition, but they implement it when certifying small businesses. The state has a long-standing policy to give preference to businesses defined as small or micro when awarding state contracts. For example, the state's current definition of a small business is a business with up to 250 employees or up to $10 million in gross receipts. The state's current definition of a micro business is a business with up to 25 employees and up to $3 million in gross receipts. These definitions matter because they make businesses eligible for procurement set-asides, which are policies that require agencies to try to purchase from certified small or micro businesses as long as there is a qualified business. On the right side of the graphic, you can see the different types of procurements that have been set aside for small and micro businesses. To research the state's small business definition, we assessed the size of businesses that are currently small. And interestingly, we found that a large portion of the state's procurement activity is actually with businesses that are much smaller than the maximum size allowed under the current small business definition. But some relatively large businesses still do qualify as small under the current definition. Slide 48 shows the data points that we have on business size. The median size of certified small businesses was very small, only 14 employees and $3.2 million in gross receipts. 94% of certified small and micro businesses had a maximum of 250 employees and $10 million in gross receipts. But the state's current definition only requires businesses to meet one of these thresholds. Therefore, 6% of certified businesses exceeded either the 250 employee threshold or $10 million in gross receipts threshold. In fact, one business had 1,900 employees and another had $397 million in gross receipts. Which leads to our last finding, that the state could change the small business definition, but it should carefully consider the potential impacts of any changes. The size at which a business is defined as small is ultimately a policy judgment for the General Assembly. We looked at other states and found that 25 have a small business definition. There are some patterns across the definitions. For example, most use some measure of employment and/or revenue for size thresholds, but there were no standard maximum size thresholds across other states. Therefore, we came up with several policy options for potential changes and assessed how they would affect businesses and SBSD. I'll walk through our policy options at a pretty high level, but there is more detail on each option in Chapter 5 of our written report. The table on slide 50 shows some of the options for changing the definition to exclude comparatively larger outlier businesses from certification. The first option would make us consistent with other states like Pennsylvania and Delaware that require businesses to meet an employment and revenue threshold. The next two options would lower current thresholds to exclude the largest businesses. Virginia's employment threshold is currently above the median across other states, so these options would address that. And all of these options would have a relatively low administrative and fiscal impact to implement, but they would remove some currently certified businesses. Virginia's definition is currently one size fits all, but we know that the size of certified businesses can vary substantially across industries. The federal government and several other states account for this by varying their small business definitions by industry. The federal government has over 1,000 different industry-specific definitions, most that are larger than Virginia's current definition. Colorado also has over 1,000 different industry-specific definitions, but the size thresholds are set at half of the federal government's. There are also several states that have different definitions for a handful of industry groups, like manufacturing businesses, service businesses, and retail businesses. We use these approaches to develop 3 policy options for changing the small business definition to vary by industry. And here's a table that shows what those options look like and how they would affect different business industries. All 3 of these options would have a relatively high administrative and fiscal impact to implement because definitions would have to be developed and SBSD would have to update their certification system and inform businesses about the new definitions. Ultimately, whether and how the small business definition should be changed is a policy call. And there is a pending disparity study that could also inform changes to the small business definition or the state's procurement preference design. To date, Virginia has not met the legal requirements necessary for race or gender specific procurement preferences, but the disparity study could change that. If new preferences are introduced, the state may want to factor that into the changes to the small business definition. We have a policy option that the General Assembly could authorize a work group to consider whether and how to adjust the state's procurement preferences and small business definition using the results of the disparity study and our study. We have some suggestions of who could be a part of the work group in our report, but the work group could ultimately submit potential legislative changes to the House General Laws Committee, the Senate General Laws and Technology Committee, and the Small Business Commission by November 1st of next year. This slide and the next slide summarize our key findings again for you. I'll just highlight a couple of them. One being that VSBFA has not fully achieved its mission of helping small businesses access financing in recent years, and the impact of COVID-19 on small businesses and additional responsibilities necessitates a VSBFA improvement plan. And most of the state's procurements go to very small businesses, but some relatively large businesses are also eligible. And that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Lauren. Senator Norman, you were in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of different directions. I'm interested, what is approximately the overall budget of this agency?
It's about $7 million in funding per year.
And what percentage of that goes to personnel, do you know?
I think it's the majority. I don't have the exact number with me, but I do believe that most of that was staff salaries and benefits.
And the reason I ask that, Mr. Chairman, is what do you attribute the turnover in the executive management of that agency? And that's sort of along the lines of what Senator Sproul was asking.
Yes, sir. So some of that turnover, particularly in VSBFA, we've been told it is challenging to find staff for some of those roles because VSBFA does have to compete with private banks, which oftentimes do offer higher salaries. So we know that's certainly the case for the loan officer positions, or has been in the past. VSBFA was able to increase the salary for its loan officer positions, but I also imagine that's the case for the executive director position and possibly also the other managerial position in that authority.
Mr. Chairman, do you have any empirical data that would suggest really what the discrepancy is between the private sector paying comparable individuals and what we're paying?
We did not do a full compensation analysis for SBSD or for VSBFA for the study. And the main reason for that was it was our understanding that after the increase in that loan officer salary, that had helped them tremendously in their recruiting efforts. I'm not sure if that's still an issue in VSBFA with the current salary. We did not look at the numbers for that, but it is something that Tracy might be able to speak to, particularly with the executive director position.
Okay, and shifting gears just a little bit, Mr. Chairman.
Norman.
Thank you, sir. do we have any feedback from agencies that are trying to meet this 42% goal as to the actual performance of the contracts that are awarded? In other words, are these contractors performing up to what would be expected if there was not this 42% goal?
We did get a lot of feedback from agencies through interviews and our survey, but I can't think of any on that particular topic. So our survey and our interviews focus mainly on whether the agencies were able to achieve the goal and how useful the SWAM planning process was. But I can't think of any comments off the top of my head that really address that quality piece that you're asking about. I know anecdotally, quality can be a concern for some agencies if they have to go with a vendor that they don't, consider is able to fully fulfill their needs. But that wasn't something that seemed to bubble up through our survey.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the reason I asked that question is parenthetically, I've heard that because of the encouragement to reach that 42% goal, that we may not always be getting the most qualified and efficient individuals that are being contracted with. No comment. My last question is, I know in 2019, maybe in the 2020 session, maybe 2019, there were initiatives to change the definition to require with the conjunctive word and for the 250 and $10 million. On that, has anyone taken a look at, if we change that definition, what the potential impact would be on the applicant pool that would be able to deliver the services in a cost efficient and effective manner? In other words, are we going to result by trying to be more ecumenical in our awarding of contracts? Are we going to be getting a less quality of a service?
So we did look at the impacts, and I will go ahead and go to one of the slides that shows a little bit of that. Your question is an important one, because we certainly did hear feedback that anytime or any way you change the definition, there's that potential for some of the certified businesses to fall out of the eligibility. And so you might have fewer businesses to work with to meet the state's procurement goal. And for these three policy options, where really the goal of these three would be if the state wanted to narrow the definition, make it smaller, and this first numerical column, certified businesses removed, we were able to calculate how many businesses would fall out. So one of the bills that was introduced this past session would have adopted an and that would remove 6% or 623 currently certified smaller micro businesses, which when we spoke with state agencies, anytime a vendor is removed, that could challenge or make it more challenging for them to procure with certified small and micro businesses. On the other hand, in the long term, you might see other businesses that are able to get certified that are especially small that could fill those gaps. But if you're interested in the different impacts of the various options here, this table has some, and then on slide 52, we were able to kind of map out how these options that would make the definition tie to industry, how they could potentially expand the definition or lower it, particularly that employee threshold by industry.
Mr. Chairman, my editorial comment on it is my concern is there's some within the administration who would like to push harder on this goal of 42 without any perspective whatsoever on the fiscal and business impact on it. But Lauren, thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Sproul?
Senator Sproul, you go back to your line of questioning.
Yes, sir. My concern, I'm understand the shortfall, they need the money and all, but still, it's the quality of those for the management on down. Like to me, we have a problem of having good workers starting from the management. So dumping money to them won't help the situation. I want to know, what are we doing besides giving recommendations what they should be doing? What are we doing to make sure we have qualified folks at the top on down to get this stuff done right? All we doing is dumping money to them, and they're not, in my opinion, they're not qualified to do the job. So what are we doing about that?
Well, Senator Spruill, of course, this is an executive branch agency, and we can make recommendations from the legislature, but ultimately the implementation of those recommendations as they relate to the specifics of the operation of the office would be up to the executive branch. There are a number of policy recommendations, however, that we can enact that we need to be considering in the next session.
Okay, thank you.
In the interest of time, how we also have the director of the agency here, if we could call her now, Tracy Wiley. Tracy, let me just say to you, first of all, thank you for working with the JLARC in preparing the report. We also want to note to the members that Tracy has a couple of page letter that's part of your report. You are in a critical position these days in terms of the important work that your office does, and you're moving into a whole new chapter with the Rebuild Virginia and COVID monies. So we want to make sure that we serve the Commonwealth most effectively. So thanks for being here today. You can go ahead with your report.
Thank you so much. Are you all able to hear me? I'm
Yeah.
having a little bit of back and forth, but I wanted to say good morning and thank you.
We've seemed to have lost you temporarily.
To everyone allowing me an opportunity this morning to speak. Have shared this morning, and whilst I know that many of the recommendations that you are reviewing are very challenging to hear.
Any suggestions on the technical issue we have here? Tracy, we're not hearing you right now.
If bandwidth is an issue, Tracy, you may try turning off your video and going audio only.
Our share with the report, but I wanted to lend to questions that have either
The agency apparently suffers from an adequate bandwidth.
We're using the House system.
Mr. Chairman, one option might be to send her a message directly over Zoom.
Yeah, we'll give
I'll try doing that now.
give a phone opportunity. Try on the phone.
do I still have you here?
Hmm? You're here.
Is everyone still here?
Yep, go ahead.
Is everyone still on the line?
We are. Maybe you could try and calling in or just going to audio.
Let's see, is there a number directly? Is
There
there
should
a
be-
number in the
There should be
chat?
a number of information.
Okay. Dial.
In your invitation message, there should be a call-in link. as part of the information in that email.
Okay, where are we?
We're waiting for her to call in, Chairman Plum. One thing would be to do is to go on with the next presentation and try to come back to her afterward, is one suggestion. But
We,
Good afternoon. Good morning. I'm
yes, sir.
back on the line.
Okay, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. I wanted to start with addressing the questions that were shared by Senator Norman, as well as Delegate Sproul, with regard to the challenges or opportunities we had with recruitment over the 3 years prior, which Lauren stated pretty clearly, but I want to add a couple more items to that, is that we did lose our executive director in 2017 to retirement. At the same time frame, we lost the chief credit officer, and then in the year after that, a significant and longstanding staff member that retired as well. So those are the three major positions that we lost in between 2017 and 2018. Immediately in 2017, I hired, I appointed the chief credit officer that was in place after we had those retirements to the position of interim director, executive director. That position and that appointment came in the time frame right before the General Assembly for the 2018 session, and it was the determination that we would wait until after the General Assembly session for 2018 before we would begin the recruitment process for the executive director. So the time frame between the departure in September of 2017 and our recruitment process immediately following the 2018 session was the significant part of that gap, which extended for about 9 months, as Lauren stated. We immediately followed the process to hire a new person in the position. That person was hired in June of that year and stayed with the agency for approximately a year. He too had come out of retirement to do the position, as the salary base for the executive director and other positions within the authority was not commensurate with what is occurring in the private sector. And then following his departure, I appointed an interim from the banking industry who had worked at traditional banks at Bank of America to support the gap in time frame so that we could do the recruitment process for a final executive director to take in the role. That position was filled within between 60 and 90 day time frame. So he was only there for the time frame to fill that gap while we were doing the recruitment. And he ended up getting a position that was significantly higher than what I had hired him for in the interim, and left within 45 days. And so there was yet again probably about a 30-day time frame before the next executive director, who is in position right now, who comes from Community Bankers Bank and has significant experience in the banking industry over the last 20 plus years. He has a great 100-day plan with a great vision for the authority, but he came into the position in the late fall of last year, and we rolled right into his first 60 to 90 days, and then unfortunately to the pandemic in which we have been operating in since that time frame. He will have been with the authority for 1 year at the end of this month. And so I understand your concern about the leadership and the regional lending officers that were vacant, positions that were vacant at that time, but it was always the desire that as we were rebuilding that team based on attrition and retirement, that we would have the opportunity to allow the new executive director the chance to hire his team, his or her team. And so I just wanted to speak more specifically about that process. It wasn't a good process in terms of the length of time, but the intention behind it was to ensure that that team rebuilt in a way that we thought was going to be valuable to the marketplace once we raised the compensation and benefits and we hired the right director. Additionally, I think there was a question from Senator Norman about how much of what percentage of our budget is staff, and it's about 54% that we dedicate to personnel. Our business is mostly around services, so our team is our primary concern, and ensuring that we get the right staff at the levels of resources that we have available. And I believe that there was a question that Lauren answered with regard to the 6% that would fall out of our current database of close to 15,000 certified businesses within the database. If we were able to change the definition from or to and, that would reduce the database by 6% or 762 plus businesses. And we don't know the impact of where those businesses fall on various contracts around the Commonwealth, and therefore would have to grandfather this legislation in for a period of time to ensure that it does not challenge the existing contracts of the Commonwealth. I think those were the key questions. There was one other from Senator Thomas around performance, around the 42% goal, and the quality of the businesses that perform to those goals. We do not currently look at performance on our end of the work. Our work is primarily around the administrative process for certification, and then the Department of General Services, where they let the contracts. They have then the opportunity to determine performance on such contracts. So if there were other questions that I missed during my transition from the Zoom screen to the phone, I'd be happy to answer those.
Ms. Wiley, I have a question, and that it relates to the fact that you're entering a new chapter of your operations with the availability of the Rebuild Virginia money and the COVID funds that are coming available. You're going to be kicked up quite a big notch. And what I want assurance of is that we're up to the task. At the same time that monies are coming available, small businesses are hurting. Do we have the ability to get that money out the door in an appropriate way, taking into account the risk and all the other considerations along? But can we get that money into the economy where it's needed?
Yes, sir. I appreciate your question and understand your concern. The Rebuild Virginia grant has been operating for about 30 days now, and we have provided a recommendation to the Secretary of Commerce and Trade and the administration to make adjustments to the Rebuild Virginia grant in order to ensure that we're able to move the monies according to plan. We have a little less than 120 days to do so. And to date, just for the report for the group, that we have closed into, I think, about $1.5 million of the grant funds, and much of the eligibility requirements, we think, had a lot to do with being able to get the monies out quickly to those that were in need of the monies during COVID-19. And I'll back up just a minute to say that the eligibility requirements that were developed for Rebuild Virginia were for businesses that were hardest hit during the pandemic, and those that were were forced to close through Executive Orders 53 and 55. And therefore, we looked at those business sectors first. There are about 6 business sectors that we believe were impacted and recommended through our conversations with VEDP, through the data, as well as information from VEC through the unemployment standards. And so those were the 6 sectors. We are in the process of expanding those sectors to some additional businesses across the Commonwealth, and to release the restriction on the eligibilities for those that have received CARES Act funding. We found that there was a significant number of businesses that had received CARES Act funding, and I know that the original intent was not to allow our ability to grant these funds to allow for those businesses to have what we call double dipping in the funding we provide and the funding that was provided by the federal government. So we were very clear in our understanding on the first round to make sure that we were only offering to those businesses that had not received funding before. However, after the 30-day time frame and the evaluation of the grant opportunity, we have made recommendations, as I said earlier, to the administration to be able to release some of those restrictions and to be very specific about what the funding will be available for going forward. So about 187 grants have been dispersed. We've had over 3,000 applications. Many of those are in those businesses that I said before were affected by EO 53 and 55. The other is in what we call the DEI category, where they are in low income or economically distressed communities. And there's a significant amount of the grants that have gone to that group as well. So we are looking to relaunch the grant with additional eligibility options within the next 7 days. And so we look forward to being able to provide more funding to more businesses at a greater opportunity. Our average grant fund right now, grant disbursement, is around $8,500.
Thank you very much for that. And is it reasonable to expect that by about January, you could give us an update on how all that's going?
Yes, sir.
And as well with the recommendations that we made. We're running past time considerably. I'm open now for a motion to that we receive the report provided by the staff.
So moved.
There's a move from Douglas Carr. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
No?
Aye.
No?
Aye.
Okay, the motion then is accepted that we have received a report. We're going to move along, and Hal, you want to introduce your next.
Happy to, Mr. Chairman. The next item on the agenda is the presentation of our evaluation of regional and infrastructure economic development incentives. Each year, we conduct an in-depth evaluation of a subset of these incentives. This year's group includes incentives to encourage business activity in economically distressed regions of the state, the coal region, the tobacco region, and enterprise zones. It also includes incentives designed to stimulate economic development through infrastructure and transportation improvements. We have what we think are useful recommendations to maximize the economic impact of these incentives. And you'll also hear that we're recommending the elimination of the coal tax credits because they're no longer relevant. I'd like to thank the various agencies that were involved in this review and the Secretary of Transportation for their assistance and cooperation and support throughout the process. Next, I'll introduce Kimberly Sarte, who's our Associate Director who oversaw this work. Kimberly?
Thank you, Hal, and good morning, Mr. Chairman. And I want to give you and the new JLARC members just a brief background of this function. In 2016, JLARC was given responsibility to evaluate the state's economic development incentives on an ongoing basis. And this was actually part of a national trend among states to take a more critical look at the spending, effectiveness, and impact of their various economic development incentives. Our evaluation function here at JLARC is headed up by Ellen Miller, JLARC's Chief Economic Development Analyst, who will be presenting to you in a few minutes. In addition to her work here at JLARC, Ellen has been involved in roundtables and forums at the national level that focus on incentives, so we're very happy to have her expertise here on staff. To conduct our evaluations, we contract with UVA's Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service, so I'd also like to introduce Terry Rephan, who is a regional economist with Weldon Cooper. Terry does most of the work on the evaluations and is also here to help answer any questions that you may have today. And Terry, would you like to just say a quick hello to introduce yourself?
Hello, commission members. Nice to meet all the new members.
Thank you, Terry. So with that, I'll turn the meeting over to Ellen to discuss Virginia's infrastructure and regional incentives.
Thank you, Ellen.
Okay, I'm getting ready to share my screen. Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. I'm Ellen Miller, and I'll present our findings on the evaluations of infrastructure and regional incentives. Slide 2 describes our mandate, which directs us to focus on spending, performance, economic benefits, and effectiveness in our evaluation of economic development incentives. Our mandate also gives us the ability to hire a contractor, and you've met Terry Rappan with Walden Cooper. Each year, we provide the Commission with 2 reports on incentives. One includes our in-depth evaluations of a select number of individual incentives. Our June meeting was canceled, but usually that is when that particular report is presented. The other report covers a high-level assessment of all incentives and is presented later in the fall. This year, it is scheduled for JLARC's November meeting. This report on infrastructure and regional incentives is our 4th in-depth evaluation. Prior reports have focused on film incentives, workforce and small business incentives, and data center and manufacturing incentives. This report covers 10 incentives. They include 2 coal tax credits to encourage business growth in the state's tobacco region, 2 grants to encourage business growth in the state, 2 coal tax credits to encourage Virginia coal production and use, and 2 grants to encourage growth in the state's tobacco region. It also includes 2 grants to encourage business growth in distressed areas in the state designated as enterprise zones, and 4 grants to encourage infrastructure development across the state. In the interest of time, my presentation does not cover all of these incentives. More detail is provided in the report, and you can certainly follow up with me later for more detail if you would like it. Slide 6 lists our major findings for this report. We found that while the coal tax credits are among the state's largest incentives, they generate negligible economic benefits for the state and no longer appear relevant. The enterprise zone grants and program are reported as useful, but poor targeting and design characteristics limit their effectiveness. We also found that a high percentage of Tobacco Region Opportunity Fund projects did not materialize, limiting the program's economic benefit. Funding for these projects was either recaptured or not paid out, however. I will first turn to our findings and recommendations for the coal tax credits. So Virginia offers 2 coal tax credits. One is the Coalfield Employment Enhancement Tax Credit, and it is designed to encourage coal mining in Virginia, as well as the employment of miners. The name is quite a mouthful, so I will refer to this tax credit as the Coalfield Tax Credit.
Hello.
According to statute,
Yeah, I tried to call you.
Anyone with an economic interest in coal is eligible to claim the credit.
Trying to get the
And
pop
this is generally
by the bridge.
This is also one of Virginia's
Senator Sproul put a
credit, which means that if the taxpayer's credit amount is larger than their tax liability, then they get a refund for the difference. This credit is also Virginia's 2nd largest incentive in terms of spending, or because this is a tax credit in terms of foregone revenue to the state. The second coal tax credit is one I will refer to as the electricity generator tax credit, because electricity generators or power plants are the intended users, and they can claim the credit if they purchase Virginia mined coal to generate power. This credit is not refundable like the other credit, but it is also Virginia's 9th largest incentive in terms of spending. Turning to our findings, the coal fuel tax credit was adopted in 1995 to help Virginia stay competitive with other coal producing states. However, it appears the credit is no longer warranted to maintain that competitiveness. Slide 11 sets the stage for why this credit was adopted. Virginia's coal production peaked in 1990, which is earlier than the peak in other states. And then coal production in Virginia fell rapidly after that. Because of the rapid decline, the Virginia Coal Association commissioned a study of the state's coal industry. And it found that Virginia was no longer competitive in the market for metallurgical coal, and that's the coal used to make steel. It was also not competitive in the market for thermal coal, and that's the coal used to make power. The reason Virginia was no longer competitive is because the thicker coal seams, and they are the easiest to mine and also the cheapest to mine, they had been exhausted. Remaining coal seams were thinner, making them more difficult and more costly to mine. To become more competitive, the study recommended creation of a tax credit, and this credit was adopted. When it was adopted, the coal fuel tax credit applied to both metallurgical coal and thermal coal. However, because of recent changes to the credit, it now only applies to metallurgical coal, which is also the market where Virginia now has a competitive advantage. Virginia is known for its high quality metallurgical coal, which is a key factor in determining competitiveness. Virginia also has good access to export markets because of the ports in Hampton Roads and Baltimore. Virginia also has only one regional competitor in the metallurgical market, and this is West Virginia. Slide 13 shows that Virginia was at a disadvantage in terms of coal productivity between 2001 and 2014. And by coal productivity, I mean the short tons of coal mined per employee hour. However, since 2015, Virginia has been as productive or more productive than states in the Central Appalachian region. We also found that the electricity generator tax credit is not relevant. A key reason is because natural gas has replaced coal as the major fuel source for power generation in the US and in Virginia. In fact, most coal-fired power plants in the state have already retired, with about 10 retiring in the past decade. Virginia currently has 3 remaining coal-fired power plants, and all but one are expected to close in the next several years. The Virginia Clean Economy Act of 2020 requires that all coal plants be retired by 2024, but because of exceptions, it only affects the Chesterfield plant. There is an exception for the Clover Power Plant in Halifax, but the plant is operating at low capacity and is expected to close by 2025. There's also an exception for Virginia City Hybrid in Wise County. This plant is designed to use waste coal, and it gets the waste coal from a nearby abandoned mine in Virginia. So the credit is not needed to incentivize the plant to purchase Virginia coal. We also found that both of the coal tax credits are estimated to have negligible economic benefits per 1 million in spending relative to other incentives, and negligible returns in revenue relative to the state. So I want to just take a moment to explain the slide. There's a lot of information on it, and I use a very similar slide for other incentives. So in terms of measuring economic benefits, we really look at 3 factors, and they are job creation, state GDP, which is basically just Virginia's share of national GDP, and personal income. Because spending varies widely across incentive programs, benefits will also vary widely. So we assess the benefits per 1 million in spending to make the results more comparable. For each of the credits, for each of the coal tax credits, we estimate that less than 10 jobs, less than 1 million in state GDP, and less than 1 million in personal income are generated because of the credits for every $1 million spent on them. We rated these results as negligible because they are among the lowest amounts among all incentives that we have evaluated so far. And again, we are rating the benefits and the return in revenue for each incentive relative to other incentives. To put these estimates into a little bit more perspective, of the incentives we've evaluated so far, the median incentive generated 60 jobs, 10 million in state GDP, and 5 million in income for every 1 million spent on the incentive. We also estimate the return in state revenue for every dollar spent on the credit. For each of the coal tax credits, we estimate that less than 5 cents is returned to the state for every dollar spent. This is substantially less than the 17-cent return in state revenue per $1 spent for the median incentive. Because these credits generate negligible economic benefits for the state and no longer appear relevant, we recommend that the General Assembly consider eliminating both of the coal tax credits. And Mr. Chairman, I'll just pause here if there are any questions about the coal credits.
Questions? Okay, Ellen, go ahead.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So next I'll turn to our findings and recommendations for the enterprise zone incentives, which are administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development, or DHCD. Virginia's enterprise zone program is designed to encourage growth in distressed areas in order to reduce regional disparity. Currently, Virginia has 45 enterprise zones, and businesses have to be located in one of the zones to receive one of the state enterprise zone grants that I will briefly describe in the next 2 slides. The Real Property Investment Grant is the largest of the enterprise zone grants and is also Virginia's 7th largest incentive in terms of spending. This grant promotes both economic development and community revitalization by encouraging investment in industrial, commercial, or mixed-use properties. The program also has a job creation grant that encourages the creation of full-time high-wage jobs. The grant amount is $500 per job for every year within a 5-year period if the business creates and maintains eligible jobs. The grant increases to $800 per year if the position pays 200% or more of the federal minimum wage. While we found that local economic developers view the grants and programs as useful, poor targeting and grant design characteristics limit their effectiveness. As you can see on slide 25, both grants received an average rating in the very useful range by local economic development staff. Most also rated the program as at least somewhat effective at creating new jobs. However, more than a third rated the program as not effective at improving infrastructure. We also found that enterprise zones are not necessarily in localities that are the most economically distressed. On average, per capita income of enterprise zone localities has been about 80% of statewide per capita income since the early 2000s. We also found that the per capita income of 2 localities with enterprise zones is higher than statewide per capita income. Because the grants are non-discretionary, grants are approved as long as the minimum eligibility requirements are met, and this means that the grants likely award behavior that would have occurred anyway. We also found that the Real Property Investment Grant does not target businesses likely to have a high economic impact, and this would be a business like a manufacturer, for example. In fact, this grant also provides awards to businesses in personal services and retail that typically have low economic impacts. While this grant program is also designed to promote community revitalization and not just economic development, we also found that it's provided awards to some businesses that likely do very little to raise property values. Slide 28 just makes the point that research we conducted for this study, as well as research of other state enterprise zone programs, have not found that areas with enterprise zones tend to have better outcomes on measures such as employment and income than similar areas without enterprise zones. Turning to the economic benefits, we estimated that the job creation grant has moderate economic benefits per 1 million spent relative to other incentives. The benefits for the real property investment grant are low. However, both grants are estimated to have moderate returns in state revenue relative to other incentives. For every 1 million spent on the grants, we estimate that 49 jobs, 7 million in Virginia GDP, and 4 million in personal income were added to the Virginia economy because of the real property investment grant. These amounts were higher for the job creation grant at 68 jobs, 12 million in GDP, and 6 million in personal income. The return in revenue for both grants are moderate at 34 cents for every $1 spent for the real property investment grant and 44 cents for the job creation grant. The next two slides highlight recommendations and a policy option to improve the enterprise zone program and incentives. This slide includes a recommendation for DHCD to review and revise the process for designating and renewing enterprise zones so that the program better targets distressed areas in the state. I will note, however, that this recommendation, if implemented, will not have immediate effects because zones have a 10-year designation period with up to 3 5-year renewals. This means that existing zones have to expire before new zones can be designated. Slide 32 includes a policy option for the General Assembly to consider eliminating the real property investment grant. It has low economic benefits relative to other incentives, and there is also a similar credit on the federal level, the Opportunity Zone tax credit. If the General Assembly chooses not to eliminate it, then it may wish to consider better targeting it to industries likely to have high economic benefits. This would include businesses with high employment multipliers that would create jobs in the surrounding area, as well as the business that received the grant. This would also include businesses in export-based or tradable industries that sell most of their goods or products outside of the state, which means they're bringing new income into the state. Because of its community revitalization purpose, the grant could also be targeted to projects that would have substantial local revitalization benefits. And Mr. Chairman, I'll pause here again if there are any questions about the Enterprise Zone program.
Questions? Hearing none, Ellen, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn now to the Tobacco Region Opportunity Fund, or the TROF program. As many of you know, the Tobacco Commission was created from the proceeds that Virginia received from the Master Tobacco Settlement Agreement. The Commission created a number of programs to help revitalize the region because it was impacted by declines in tobacco production, as well as other industries. This particular program was created to encourage businesses to locate or expand in the tobacco region. During our study period, which is between fiscal 10 and fiscal 18, this program provided $99 million in grants to businesses that had to create at least 10 jobs and make a capital investment of at least $1 million. Our key finding for this program is that the majority of projects did not meet their job creation or capital investment goals during the study period. In fact, at the early years in the study period, so between fiscal 10 and 13, many of the projects did not materialize. We also found that due diligence procedures in awarding the grants are lacking. Slide 36 just shows that only 29% of projects met their job creation goals. Slightly more than that met their capital investment goals, and slightly more than that met their wage goals. This next slide just shows that half the projects did not materialize and were canceled. 40% the award was not paid out, and the other 10% of total projects that were captured, the funds were recaptured. We estimate that TROF has moderate economic benefits per 1 million in spending and a moderate return in state revenue relative to other incentives. This may be surprising because of the prior two slides that indicated poor performance, but it's because TROF grants are also generally well targeted to businesses likely to have high economic benefits. I will note that although these benefits and returns are moderate, they tend to be lower than the economic benefits and returns for grants. And this is because of the poor project performance that I noted in the prior two slides. This slide just shows that for every 1 million spent on TROF, we estimate that 69 jobs, 11 million in state GDP, and 7 million in personal income were added to the Virginia economy. The return in revenue was 40 cents per dollar spent. We found that the information collected on TROF projects and the project review process is not as thorough as the due diligence process used by VEDP. However, I'll also point out that the Tobacco Commission has a very small staff, and it is not feasible for them to fully replicate VEDP's process. Slide 40 lists our recommendation for the Tobacco Commission to adopt a checklist of standard information that all TROF applicants must submit. This is also similar to what VEDP does, so they could use a similar checklist or a modified checklist to best meet the needs for this program. Then VEDP and the Tobacco Commission should collaborate to develop a feasible project review process to be performed with limited staff, and also to develop a process for VEDP to share results of their reviews when projects are seeking grants from both a VEDP program and the TROF program. We also have a policy option for the Tobacco Commission to consider requiring that all TROF grant awards be paid after performance. This would reduce the need to perform due diligence on all projects and enable the Tobacco Commission staff to focus on projects seeking large grant awards that would limit the availability of funding for other projects in a given period. Mr. Chairman, I'll pause here for any questions.
Questions? Hearing none, Ellen, go ahead.
Okay, sure. So now I'll turn to the last section, which covers the Economic Development
Mr. Chairman,
Act.
I did have a question. I'm sorry.
Senator Howe.
Thank you. Was there any consideration of incorporating the Tobacco Commission into VEDP?
For this particular study, no, that was not a consideration.
I think it's something we might consider. Thank you.
Okay, I guess it is a dedicated funding source, so that you might need to take a look at the statutory language for that. Okay, I'll move on to the Economic Development Access Program. So this program is one of Virginia's 3 grants that focus on ensuring adequate access to business sites. This particular program funds things like access roads, which would be a secondary road into an industrial park or a road within an industrial park. We found that this program has generally not met its employment expectations that projects reported as part of the application process. This has limited the program's economic impact. Slide 45 shows that projects collectively met only about 70% of their job creation expectations within 6 years after grants were awarded. As a result, this program is estimated to have low economic benefits per 1 million in spending, but it has a moderate return in revenue to the state relative to other incentives. This slide shows that for every 1 million spent on the grant, we estimate that 48 jobs, 9 million in state GDP, and 5 million in personal income were added to the Virginia economy on average. The return in revenue for the grant was 29 cents per dollar spent. I will note this program may have other transportation related benefits that were not included in this analysis. And then slide 48 just summarizes our recommendation to improve the economic benefit of this grant. This particular grant has fairly broad eligibility requirements. Projects have to be in an export-based or tradable industry, and it has to involve a business location or expansion, but that's about it. There are no minimum job creation or capital investment requirements like there are with many other incentive grant programs in the state. We recommend that the General Assembly consider amending the program statute to include more standard eligibility requirements for job creation and capital investment. The Commonwealth Transportation Board could be given the authority to revise the program guidelines to align with criteria that are currently used for other VEDP grants, such as the Commonwealth's Opportunity Fund and the Virginia Investment Partnership Grant. Similar revisions were made several years ago to another transportation infrastructure program, and that's the Transportation Partnership Opportunity Fund. And those changes were made to bolster that program. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my prepared remarks. I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
Are there questions of Ellen? If not, then do I have a motion that we receive the report?
So moved.
Moved, and a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
The report is received. Now, Ellen, I think you're also now going to give us an overview of where you're going with future incentive reviews.
I can do that, or I think the director of the Department of Housing and Community Development had asked to speak and is on the agenda. Do you want to do that first or not?
Okay, let's go ahead and let him speak very briefly. That's excuse me, Mr. Eric Johnston. I'm sorry, I overlooked you. Mr. Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I will be very brief and appreciate the JLARC staff for their professionalism and work and partnering to look at the Enterprise Zone program. I just wanted to cover a quick couple topics on enterprise zones. One, it really is a unique partnership for our agency's work in both incentivizing economic development and the return on investment for the Commonwealth, but also partnering with localities with their local efforts to do both traded sector work, commercial and mixed use, and really is a key revitalization tool that the Commonwealth uses in partnership with localities to increase local property taxes as vacant or underutilized buildings are rehabbed and put into better and higher uses that really do help the local tax base. So we are working diligently to look at all the recommendations. We'll begin on some of the automation and different agency recommendations that we can control to increase some of the processes on automation of the job collection data. The two pieces that I wanted to address you on, the two main findings were better targeting distress, and then also the what to do with the real property investment grants. On better targeting the distress, we as an agency, if you look at the map of all of the 45 zones in the Commonwealth, it really tracks with South Side, Southwest, the Richmond, Central Virginia region, Hampton Roads, and tracks the fiscal stress index on the whole. There are some localities that are increasing their, increasing their economic productivity outcomes, and some of them are up higher. You would expect that in a program where, based on many different factors, there are localities that are strengthening, and many of these localities are part of joint zones with surrounding distressed regions. So we definitely will be looking at that. We'll be working with the Virginia Economic Developers Association, stakeholders, businesses to get feedback as we go into the next session, as the reporting requirements come due. I think it is key, though, in code to note that
we cannot add any new zones based on the current code until 2029. So this program is focused on bringing those zones that are experiencing economic distress further into economic opportunity, but the time periods are there in place so that businesses can create those long-term investments. The last piece I'll mention on the real property investment grants, because local property taxes, much of the tax benefit and ROI, return on investment, is at the local level. While this study compares the state return on investment, it's really critical to also take into the picture that in distressed regions, the localities we're partnering with are trying to get vacant properties, both in the traded sectors, where we have the manufacturing examples, the higher job creation, but then we also have examples of those downtown projects that are rehabbing downtowns across our enterprise zones in combination with a suite of other incentives and other agencies and local efforts. The opportunity zones, the federal opportunity zones were mentioned, and that is in the report, that is a federal tax incentive. It is different in the sense that it requires equity investors, and many of our small and mid-sized businesses that are most impacted by the pandemic and eligible for enterprise zones are not seeking equity investment. But I will say the best practice nationally to compete for this equity investment in our distressed zones in Virginia was to pick zones that paired with enterprise zones with opportunity zones. So many of the zones in Virginia do have both, and that is to really make sure that there's that double ability to attract investment in some distressed zones where the investment may not come otherwise. So it will harm our competitive position in Virginia if the enterprise zone designation for real property improvement grants is not layered on top of the opportunity zone in terms of attracting national capital. So there's just a few of the comments. We really appreciate JLARC's efforts on this and the insights, and we look forward to this work helping us to improve the program and strengthen it. And we would be happy to work with any member of the commission or legislature that has ideas in that space as well. So thank you for the time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much for that response and your positive attitude towards our efforts here, so thank you. Ellen, you want to tell us where we're going from here?
Sure thing. Let me bring it up real quick. Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to quickly bring the Commission's attention to the next round of incentives that we have started evaluating for next year's report. This group includes 11 exemptions, grants, or tax credits that are targeted at businesses that are involved in international trade or the transportation of goods. You look toward the top of that list, you'll see some sales tax exemptions for railroads, airlines, and shipping companies. These are among some of the largest of the state's incentives and also some of the oldest incentives. This group also includes several tax credits and grants for businesses that ship or receive cargo through the Port of Virginia. And it also includes 2 programs that help businesses increase their international sales. And just want to point out, this will be our 5th group of incentives that we are evaluating. After this group, we have about 5 or 6 categories of incentives that are grouped by industry or purpose left to evaluate. And based on the schedule that we had developed when we started this ongoing evaluation process, we think it'll take about 3 years to get through the remaining incentives. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman, but I'd be happy to answer any questions if any members have questions.
Ellen, thank you very much. These reports have been very enlightening for us, and we look forward to this next round. Thank you. Now, for other business today, looking ahead as to what we're going to be doing as a commission, our work plans for future years, we have a subcommittee chaired by Delegate Sickles, who has had a meeting looking at what the range of topics might be as we go forward with our work plans. Delegate Sickles, you want to give us a brief report of where we are?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll try to be brief. We had our subcommittee meeting on Friday, and we discussed, came in with some 5 recommendations, and we expanded it slightly to have a couple more. Now, I'll go through this real quickly. The number one concern of members was to have a thorough study of the Virginia Employment Commission, with the new federal programs and the sheer explosion of applications for UI. Our constituents have been understandably frustrated by the delays and confusion, and we therefore want to see how we can help the agency run better, both in the pandemic that we're in and in normal times later. Secondly, this needs to be refined and narrowed down, but we want to work in tough areas and comparing Virginia to other states on criminal justice reform. We do not want to step on anything at all that the Crime Commission may be studying thoroughly, but there are a lot of issues like juvenile justice, which was a concern of Senator Locke in particular, and gun violence in communities and prison and jail, personal inmate improvement opportunities. I know we are proud of what we do at the DOC now. We do have a high recidivism rate though in our local jails, and we could look at that issue. Number three was since the school systems are going to mostly all virtual education in K-12 during the pandemic, we need to make sure that virtual learning experience is as high a quality as possible. So we recommend a study to ensure that we are prepared in the future to deliver virtual education effectively and high quality. And also, as with the VEC, what part of virtual education should become standard in normal times for a well-rounded 21st century education? How can access to broadband be improved to ensure the quality of virtual education, and what teaching techniques should be used to ensure effective virtual education? Number four, and this is partly based on a Richmond Times-Dispatch investigative series of our guardians and conservators system performance, just looking into that whole program, how many wards should a single guardian be expected to manage? What systems can be set up to discover abuse? What current operations and performance standards are being met? Where are the holes in our regulatory oversight? What evidence-based practices can be adopted in the Commonwealth that lead to positive outcomes? These are some of the questions in the Guardians Conservators program that we need to look at. Number five is housing. Housing for moderate income workforce, for low income workers, for those suffering from substance abuse and serious mental illness. These housing this kind of housing is increasingly short supply in the Commonwealth. So we recommend a comprehensive housing study to examine best practices to fill these critical needs. What can the state do? And more importantly, how can state government best assist local government in their housing initiatives? Number six, we discussed was a recognition that there are other parts of the state and local government that are being affected by the pandemic, and we recommend a review of these impacts on key areas of government, just the pandemic effects on state and local government. Number seven, the transportation funding into the future is an issue. I'm not sure, whether this is the highest priority or if we would do a major study on this, but we did pass a bill to patch us through these next few years, as our primary source of revenue for transportation is declining every year. We all know that, and we need to prepare for the future to see how we're going to fund transportation once we're all driving electric cars. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that's a review of the study ideas that we have. And I don't know if we need a motion from someone to move that the commission study these ideas, or what the next procedure is.
Yeah, Delegate Sickles, I would recommend that the subcommittee continue to do its work, and that you come back with a more refined product at our next meeting, and we take a look at developing that in plans. Okay. Right now, it sounds to me like you got about a decade's worth of work for JLARC, and we may need to whittle that down a little bit and give it some priority.
Sounds good.
Any of the members have a question?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Norman.
Of those 7 items that Delegate Sickles just went over, how many of those came out of recommendations of the General Assembly that be referred to JLARC for study?
I'm not sure we can tell you the exact number, but I will tell you the starting point for discussion was, in fact, the recommendations that came to JLARC from members of the General Assembly. That was the starting point. Do you know the actual number?
I don't know the actual number, but I would say to the senator that it's probably a little over half came from instructions from Rules Committee and other committees sending ideas to JLARC. In the criminal justice reform area, we kind of lumped several smaller studies together that we need to, especially in light of the chairman's admonition here, to scope that down to something that we really need, because those subjects are big. Juvenile justice reform on its own is a huge issue, and so we look forward to doing that.
Mr. Chairman, the reason I asked the question, and I apologize that I missed the meeting, how many recommendations that came out of the General Assembly for JLARC to undertake were not included in this list of 7?
Delegate Sickles.
I can probably look that up, but maybe the Director Greer has been following this closely. Maybe you could answer that question.
Senator Norman, I believe that at least there are probably 4 or 5. I don't have the list in front of me of the referred over from rules, but I think 4 or 5 probably that were referred over and are not part of this list.
Mr. Chairman, the reason I asked the question, and I truly respectful that there is a new sheriff in town, but historically speaking, generally, the prioritization of studies have been the referrals from the legislators to the General Assembly, and as opposed to maybe subordinating all of those to ones that pop up spontaneously. So again, editorial comment.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Sickles.
Well, I would just say that the top 5 of those came from the general, at least from the House side of the Rules Committee's recommendations, particularly VEC. That's number one concern by many people, based on our own constituent experiences this year. The conservator guarantees that is. I'm sorry.
All right. Hal, do we have other items?
Mr. Chairman, that concludes the agenda from the staff standpoint. I would just mention and remind the commission that our next meeting is Monday, October 5th. And at that meeting, we'll present the findings from our review of the Department of Education, our annual spending report, and our follow-up on how well VETA is doing. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. And members, we're 25 minutes over our appointed adjournment time. I'll try to do better in October. But thank you all for your participation today, and have a safe week. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor? We stand now adjourned.
Aye.
Take care now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.